You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
and
Killer Communications.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, Amy, and welcome back, listeners. Today's case was suggested by Wendy D. Wendy writes that she loves us and our show, so a big thank you for being such a dedicated listener, Wendy. And thank you for passing along the Arlis Perry case, your suggestion for today. Even though we've done 2 cases at Stanford University, I didn't know anything about this crime and Arlis Perry until this suggestion. So I'm glad that we're able to shed some light on her story today. While we did a deep dive into Stanford University's history in episodes 38 and 39, it's been a while, so let's start with a little refresher on the school's background, and particularly their on-campus chapel, Memorial Church. The university itself was built by robber Baron Leland Stanford and his wife Jane in 1885 as a memorial to their teenage son, Leland Jr., who died of typhoid at the age of 15. When Leland Sr. also passed away in 1893, Jane had an enormous chapel erected at the center of the campus in his honor. The Stanfords were a deeply religious family, and aside from memorializing her late husband, Jane felt that providing an on-campus place for students to pray and reflect was an important part of their educational experience. If you recall from our Jane Stanford episodes, Jane was extremely involved in every detail of the university, and the chapel was no different. She personally designed everything from the ornate terracotta roof to the inspirational messages carved into each wall. But she had an eye for the timelessness, and the chapel quickly became the university's architectural crown jewel. The photos of it online really do showcase how beautiful it is, so I suggest our listeners take a look. The outside is covered in colorful religious murals and grand arches, and inside, the church is lined with intricate stained glass windows, painted sandstone arches, and enormous frescoes depicting Christian iconography all the way up to the ceiling. The building houses 5 pipe organs and can hold 1,200 people in the hand-carved pews. While Catholic services are held in the chapel several times a week, the building is open to anyone from the campus or the Palo Alto community who want a quiet, beautiful place to pause and reflect. And on an October night in 1974, that was exactly what a young woman named Arlis Perry was looking for. Born Arlis K. Dykema on February 22nd of 1955, Arlis grew up as the youngest of 3 children in the small, blue-collar town of Linton, North Dakota. In 1963, when Arlis was 8, her family relocated to Bismarck, where her parents ran an automotive company called Dykema Standard. But while it was in the state capital, Bismarck was a small city by most standards, and Arlis grew up in a tight-knit community of her family and their extended circle of friends from the Bismarck Reformed Presbyterian Church. Her parents were incredibly religious people who helped found the Bismarck Reformed Church, and her father volunteered as an elder and even ran the Sunday school program there. So Arlis was heavily devoted to her family's faith, and she followed in her father's footsteps in her involvement with their church. But while participating in religious volunteerism took up a lot of her time, she still found time to be active in her high school as well. Arlis made the cheerleading team 3 years in a row, and she was described by her teammates as bubbly, enthusiastic, and incredibly popular at school. She often baked cupcakes for her fellow cheerleaders and was thoughtful, kind, and always saw the best in people. And this nature led to her work as an evangelist for her faith. Throughout high school, Arlis worked for a religious youth organization called Young Life, and she was a member of the international sports ministry called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So both of these organizations sent teens on mission trips to spread the word about their faith to other teenagers. And through her work in these organizations, Arlis met a fellow athlete who shared her religious convictions. Bruce Perry was a track and field star who was also involved with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He was a Bismarck native and went to Arlis's high school, but reports aren't clear if they hung out in the same social groups there. He also came from a similar family background as Arlis, and the two had a lot in common. They began dating their senior year and fell in love quickly. So much so that by their graduation, they were discussing a more long-term relationship. But as Arlis was thinking about setting up a future with Bruce in their hometown, Bruce suddenly got accepted to Stanford on an athletic scholarship. It was an opportunity he could not turn down. So he accepted this, but that meant that he moved immediately to Palo Alto, California, to major in pre-med with a concentration in human biology. So this is a big move, and also he's taking on very big roles as well. And while there's this great distance between the two, it didn't deter the young couple. They still saw a future together. It was just going to be a little delayed.
And what about Arlis? What did she do? Did she go to school somewhere?
Yeah, so she enrolled at a local junior college, basically a community college. Mm-hmm. And she took a part-time job at a dental clinic as a receptionist. During Bruce's first year away, they wrote letters to each other almost daily and had long-distance phone calls as often as possible. Isn't that sweet? Remember when people used to write letters to each other? Couples?
Yes, of course.
I know.
I did that with my high school / college boyfriend.
Yes, I did too. And it reminded me of that. And I went, oh, I remember when
sweet.
That was a thing. Yes. By the end of Bruce's freshman year, the couple knew that they wanted to get married. And upon returning to Bismarck for summer break, Bruce proposed. And Arlis accepted immediately. And both of their families were elated. But it would be a very short engagement as Bruce had to go back to Stanford in the fall. So they had their wedding only 4 months later on August 17th, 1974. And in case you ask, Amy, they were both 19 years old.
Oh, okay. But that seems a little young, but for the time, that was pretty normal, right?
Yeah, I don't think that was abnormal for the time. And remember, the families were excited. They were responsible. They had a plan. And only 2 weeks later, Arlis accompanied Bruce back to Palo Alto, a 1,600-mile distance from the only community she'd ever known. As the newlyweds moved into an apartment in Stanford's Escondido village, Arlis was faced with something she hadn't expected in her new adventure, and that was loneliness. When they returned, Bruce was in class most of the day, and even when he was home, his pre-med classes included intense amounts of studying, and that meant that he was holed up with books and a notepad most every evening.
Did she have friends? Was she often, she had like a group of friends or anything?
No, because she was new there. And remember, she came from a very large support system of family and friends. And here, because she was new, all she really had was Bruce. But she was smart enough to know that she needed to get out of the house. So she became a member of Stanford's Memorial Church and got a job as a receptionist with a local law firm. I mean, yes, but neither of these things really solved her loneliness problem. People who came to the law firm didn't have time to talk. And even though she regularly attended the Memorial Church, it was utilized by the locals as a space for reflection and contemplation, not so much socialization. She wrote back home to her family that while Stanford was beautiful, it was extremely difficult to make any friends. And while Bruce did his best to be attentive, it wasn't the same as having her friends and family to talk to. But Arlis really tried to adapt and make the best of the situation. She often went jogging while Bruce was in class, and one thing she really enjoyed was walking around the campus at night because the weather was always so nice. Though she stopped doing this when Bruce explained that Palo Alto wasn't really a safe place for a woman to be by herself, even on the campus.
Why is that? I don't think I've heard that before about that area.
Right, exactly. So probably because two young women had been murdered near Stanford's campus in 1973 and 74. And due to their similarity in their murders, many people believed that Stanford had a serial killer. And
they were unsolved.
Well, they were for a long time, but this theory about a serial killer proved true or correct because in 2018, DNA linked serial killer John Arthur Getrew to the cases. But in 1974, all Bruce knew was that young women seemed to be being targeted and he was worried about her safety. But feeling like she was stuck inside after dark also made Arlis's life a bit isolating. But she and Bruce loved each other, and Arlis was determined to make Palo Alto her new home. Sadly, she would never get to that point. On October 12, 1974, Bruce was spending his evening buried in his books while Arlis tidied the apartment and cleaned up after the dinner dishes. She wrote a few letters to her family back home in Bismarck, and by 11:30 p.m., Bruce had finished his studying for the night. So Arlis asked if he could walk her up to the mailbox in the middle of campus to drop the letters. He agreed, looking forward to having a walk and spending some time together. Despite the late hour, also, the campus was rowdy since it was a Saturday night, and students milled around on the lawns as loud music blared from all the open dorm windows. But as exciting as the environment was around them, the newlyweds' romantic 20-minute walk to the mailbox ended up in a spat over whose turn it was to pump up the failing tire on their car. And while this feels like a minor disagreement, Arlis was described by her family as a particularly sensitive person who was easily distressed by perceived hostility or even confrontation. Yeah, you also want to say added to feeling kind of lonely or on her own. Perhaps she had increased sensitivity at the time. Whatever Bruce said made Arlis upset enough that as they passed the memorial church, she told Bruce she needed to go to the church to pray and to be alone for a little while. So he was used to this, as she'd often go sit in the pews to contemplate something when she was upset. So he left her at the front doors of the church and went back to their apartment.
Meghan, what time was it? Sorry if you said it already.
No, that's okay. This was late. The church always closed to parishioners at midnight. So he assumed that she would be back by 12:15 or so.
What time did he leave her there?
Well, they had gone for that walk at around 11:30, so I assume that he left her there around 11:45. I don't know the exact time.
Okay, but the church would be closing soon.
That's correct. So, it was between 11:30 and 12.
Okay.
And when 12:30 came around with no Arlis, Bruce began to wonder what had held her up. He went up to the church, but the doors were locked and the windows were dark. There were no signs of his wife. He thought she might still be angry at him and was walking the campus. But after going all over the grounds, no one had seen Arlis. He hoped that she'd just gone home and he'd just missed her, but when he returned at 3 a.m., their apartment was empty. He immediately called the police to report Arlis missing. And he'd hoped she'd just fallen asleep in the church and maybe someone had locked her in by mistake. But when the police went up to do a perimeter check and shine their flashlights through the windows, they didn't see anyone inside, and the building was locked and nothing looked amiss. They tried to assure Bruce that she'd probably return when she calmed down, but as the sun rose the next morning, Arlis was still missing.
I would imagine there's no chance that there's cameras given the year.
No. Definitely not. No surveillance here. Around 6 a.m., the police knocked on Bruce's door. When he answered, they informed him he needed to come to the station to fill out an official missing persons report. But once there, Bruce was questioned for 2 hours on whether or not he had gotten abusive with Arlis the previous night.
Was there any history of him being abusive?
No. And he was horrified that they were suggesting that he had acted so terribly And when he asked why and demanded to know where his wife was, the police asked if he'd give his fingerprints and take a polygraph. He said yes to both. After he passed the polygraph, though, the police told him the awful truth. Arlis was dead. And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
Confronting high credit card debt can feel scary, but the good news is, if you owe $10,000 or more in credit card debt, financial relief options are now available. National Debt Relief is currently offering debt relief designed to reduce what you owe and put you on the fast track to becoming debt-free. If you qualify for debt relief, you may be able to pay back less than what you owe and save thousands of dollars. Just visit nationaldebtrelief.com. Imagine only paying one low monthly program payment you can afford and saving money as you become debt-free. National Debt Relief has already helped bring debt relief to over 550,000 U.S. consumers, earning thousands of five-star reviews and an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. You're stronger than your credit card debt. Let today be the day you start turning things around. Take the first step and visit nationaldebtrelief.com to see what debt relief you may qualify for. That's nationaldebtrelief.com.
The new year means new health goals, not just for your body, but for your finances too. But did you know financial health is directly related to identity protection? You need LifeLock because your personal info is in endless places that are outside of your control. It only takes one mistake, and not even your mistake, to expose you to identity theft and lost funds. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points per second and alerts you to threats you could miss on your own. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. In fact, restoration is guaranteed or your subscription money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or other financial losses from identity theft alone. Resolve to make identity, health, and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
At 5:30 a.m. on October 13th, Stanford's night watchman, Stephen Crawford, called police while on his check of Memorial Church and told 911, quote, "We've got a stiff in here." Yeah, I mean, he'd been a patrol officer with Santa Clara prior to being a security officer, so maybe he was using the terminology that was used then.
That sounds so insensitive. But okay.
It does. When the homicide team arrived, they found the half-naked body of a blonde young woman. While she was still wearing a jacket, she was lying on her back and her sweater had been pushed up to expose her breasts. Her bra, underwear, and jeans had all been removed. Her legs were spread in a clear indication of a sexual assault. And though her jeans had been draped over her pelvic area, a 36-inch-long altar candle had been inserted inside of her. Yes, this is really horrific. A second candle had been placed between her breasts and her arms folded across her chest. Her head was only a few feet from the base of the altar, and the lower half of her body was under the first set of pews. A pool of blood had formed where an open wound just above her left ear still contained a broken-off ice pick. Her purse was nearby, and inside was a driver's license for Arlis Perry. The police had found Bruce's missing wife, just not how they had hoped. While Bruce was interviewed, Arlis's body was removed to the medical examiner's office, where it was determined that she had died from the impact of the ice pick. There were also signs of strangulation, though Arlis had no defensive wounds indicating that she tried to fight off her killer.
Maybe it was a blitz attack?
Yeah, or that she was most likely dead or in the process of dying when the strangulation occurred. Yeah, this is an awful scene. And likewise, the sexual assault with the altar candles had been post-mortem. The Emmy ruled her death a homicide and concluded she'd been killed around midnight, probably only minutes after she entered the church. But who had done this and why?
Well, I'm assuming the first place they look is going to be her husband.
Well, they already did, but I think they quickly eliminated him in this case. So at the scene, investigators never found the handle to the broken ice pick. They assumed that the killer had absconded with it. But they were able to pull a partial palm print off the altar candles and take a semen sample from one of the kneeling pillows next to Arlis's body. Now, this is in a time before DNA forensics, and though the sample wasn't helpful then, a forward-thinking investigator felt that it might be someday. And I thought, wow, good for him. The real prize was the palm print, and detectives went about finding out who'd been in the church between 11:30 p.m. and its closing. In his interviews, Bruce said no one had followed them to the church, so police surmised that Arlis's killer had to be someone who was already there. Word of her murder spread through the campus like wildfire, and by 11 a.m. on the morning of her death, not only was a mass being conducted in her memory in the sanctuary, but 2 eyewitnesses went to the police to say that they had seen Arlis enter the church the night before. And this is what they said. She sat by herself in the front pew on the left-hand side of the church, and when they left at midnight, she was still there, alone, deep in prayer with her head down and her eyes closed. It's just like the vulnerability of the moment and being there to seek solace. It all really adds to the tragedy. Another witness came forward to say that they had seen Arlis go into the church, and a few minutes later, they saw a young man around 25 years old with sandy-colored hair and a bright blue short-sleeved shirt go into the church, too. Police continued to take in more tips as the day closed, and by the 24-hour mark of the murder, they knew that 7 people had been in the church at the same time as Arlis, and 2 university staff members had key access to the building at all times. The night watchman, Stephen Crawford, and the dean of the chapel, Robert Kelly. All 7 people and both key holders were identified, interviewed, and given polygraph tests, along with having their palm prints taken. None were a match to the print, and all of them passed the polygraph. The only outstanding person was the sandy-haired young man. He didn't fit the description of any of the 7 people who'd been in the church when Arlis entered. Police needed to find him, especially since Arlis was the 3rd woman to be murdered around Stanford University area in less than 18 months. The community feared a serial killer was in their midst, and police offered a $10,000 reward for any information in Arlis's case. And lots of tips came in, but none matched the palm print, and there was no sign of the sandy-haired young man. So the police went back to their original list and re-interviewed the only people known to be in the church that night. Their most important witness was the night watchman, Stephen Crawford, since not only had he found Arlis's body, but he had supposedly done a night check of the building around 2 a.m. as well. Now, so that should have been like, well, why didn't you find her then, right? Well, in his second interview, he claimed that he'd been running late to lock up and arrived at 12:10. So instead of walking through the front doors, he went through the rear of the building and simply yelled out into the sanctuary that he was closing the doors for the night and anyone there should leave.
This could be one of those situations where somebody does something wrong and they lie to police because they don't want to get in trouble on a small level, but then it makes them look guilty. We've seen this a lot of times in the cases before.
Yeah, we certainly have. He also said when he went back at 2 a.m. that the west side door was locked and the building was empty. But when he returned at 5:30 a.m. to open the building, he found Arlis deceased. So there are 2 pieces of his testimony that didn't fit. Arlis had most likely been killed around the same time he was closing the building, which meant he would have seen her body when he did the 2 a.m. check. So that part did not quite fit. Investigators also learned from the ministry dean, Robert Kelly, that one of the bathroom windows didn't lock completely, something Stephen Crawford most likely knew about but never mentioned or discussed in the interviews. Detectives were suspicious of him, since he was the only person whose testimony had discrepancies, but after the palm print was cleared and he passed the polygraph, there was really no other evidence to implicate him. So police returned their attention to searching for the sandy-haired man eyewitnesses claimed followed Arlis into the church. Investigators found that a young man with blonde hair had visited Arlis at work the day before her murder. This is another case of really like good old-fashioned police work. They're canvassing. Arlis's coworker saw the man come in and talk to her in the law firm's waiting room for about 15 minutes. And this coworker said that the conversation seemed tense, and Arlis looked sad and flustered when she returned to work. But no one was able to identify who this was. When they asked Bruce, it wasn't him, and he was adamant that Arlis didn't know anyone in the area yet. And if it had been a stranger who'd upset her, she hadn't told him about it. Without any viable suspects, Arlis's case went cold, though it did not stop the public from weighing in on the theories and speculation. Okay, one of the early theories, I don't know that this will surprise you actually, but one early theory was that Arlis had fallen prey to one of the United States' most famous serial killers, Ted Bundy.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
No. But I'm not surprised that they brought up kind of famed serial killers, I guess, at the time. As many of our listeners probably know, Bundy had a long history of targeting young college-aged women. He had studied at Stanford in the 1960s and was known to frequent California's Bay Area between 1973 and 74. And while investigators looked into this angle, Bundy had a timestamp receipt from a gas station for the night of her murder. So they were able to clear him. Then 4 years later, police got a tip from a different serial killer who claimed he knew what had happened to Arlis. This serial killer, David Berkowitz, better known as the Son of Sam, sent a book on Satanism to the police department in Arlis's hometown of Bismarck with the note, quote, Arlis Perry hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California Stanford University. Along with the book, Berkowitz wrote the police a letter explaining that he had been told that the Process Church of Final Judgment, which was a Satanist cult, had put out a hit on Arlis Perry after she and a friend tried to convert their members to Christianity.
That sounds a little far-fetched.
And when they went to interview Berkowitz, he claimed that he'd only been sent newspaper articles about Arlis's murder. After 30 minutes of trying to get more information out of him, he terminated the interview, citing that other inmates would think he was working for the police as an informant.
Although I said it seems far-fetched, we've heard of stranger things. So is there any validity to this possible scenario?
Yeah, I mean, despite there being no evidence that her murder was part of a satanic ritual, the very fact that she'd been killed in a church and her body had been discovered in what we would say a posed position allowed Berkowitz's letter to spawn a public obsession with the idea. So much so that 13 years after her murder, an investigative reporter named Maury Terry published a book on her case suggesting that Satanism was exactly what had killed the 19-year-old wife. This book, titled The Ultimate Evil, explored the potential link between the Satanist church and Arlis. Terry's take was that the unidentified man who'd argued with Arlis at work the day before she was killed was really a member of the Process Church, and he was requesting a secret meeting with Arlis. She then staged a fight with Bruce in order to have an excuse to go pray at the local church, but in reality, she was meeting the unidentified man, and he then killed her ritualistically as part of a satanic sacrifice.
These types of killings are usually sexual in nature?
Which types of killings?
If it was part of a satanic ritual, because you said she was sexually assaulted.
She was. It's interesting. While I won't claim to be any expert in satanic killings, I believe they split the lines in terms of some are sexually related and some are not. I don't think the evidence is quite clear on that. I mean, this is also, I thought, how did he come to this conclusion? And how he did come to the conclusion, according to his research, there were several caves near Bismarck where Arlis had grown up that were allegedly used for satanic ceremonies. He surmised that David Berkowitz's claims that she had tried to evangelize these groups made sense based on how often she went on these mission trips. Now, no evidence of any satanic rituals were ever found there, but after Terry's book became a bestseller, thousands of tourists started flocking to the caves. And this is actually crazy because With all this tourist activity, it made the caves so unstable that they had to be filled in, which then led to rumors that the caves were being destroyed due to satanic practices. The book was a lot of hype, and despite the hype, investigators dismissed it, and for good reason. The theories weren't based in any grounded evidence, and it really brought no new leads. After the book fervor died down, no other information went public until 2011, when a 59-year-old man named Bruce McCracken, that's not her husband, because I know his name is Bruce as well, thought he knew who killed Arlis. So, in talking to a retired police officer one afternoon, McCracken claimed he'd been walking past the church when he heard strange flute music coming out of the building. He'd looked in and saw a young man whom he recognized as being in Stanford's marching band playing flute at the altar. And lying on the altar was a naked white woman with a candle on either side of her, watching the flutist play. At the time, McCracken claimed he thought they were just into some weird sex game, so he'd left and not given it much thought. But after talking to the police officer, he wondered if the woman could be Arlis. So, he found an old photo of the marching band on the internet and was able to pick out the flutist and sent the information to the Santa Clara County Police as a tip. And they took it seriously. They found the flutist, who is now, by the way, a professional musician, and interviewed him. But nothing in the interview suggested he'd been at the church the night of her murder or even that he knew Arlis Perry.
I was just going to say, again, this is just showing like good old-fashioned police work. Like all these types of leads that they are pursuing.
Yeah, they really did. And they took his DNA just in case, but he was ultimately dismissed as a suspect.
Please tell me something else happened after this. Did we get answers in this case?
Well, one piece of evidence was about to blow the case wide open. We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors.
The new year means new health goals, not just for your body, but for your finances too. But did you know financial health is directly related to identity protection? You need LifeLock because your personal info is in endless places that are outside of your control. It only takes one mistake, and not even your mistake, to expose you to identity theft and lost funds. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points per second and alerts you to threats you could miss on your own. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's US-based restoration specialist will fix it, backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. In fact, restoration is guaranteed or your subscription money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or other financial losses from identity theft alone. Resolve to make identity, health, and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
While investigators had been sporadically sending DNA from Arlis's case to the lab for testing over the years, nothing ever came back conclusive. However, in 2016, a complete DNA profile of an unknown male was lifted from Arlis's genes. Over the next 2 years, police located and took DNA samples from each of the 9 people who'd been in the church or who had had access to it on the night of Arlis's murder, as well as the flutists and her husband, Bruce. And only one match came back. Do you want to take a guess at who it was?
Bruce?
Nope. It was the night watchman, Stephen Crawford.
Oh, yeah. I could see that. Okay.
Now, if you recall, the police had always suspected him since his had been the only alibi that hadn't really fit the timeline. But without DNA evidence, there had been nothing to connect him for 44 years. But they had re-interviewed him several times throughout the 4 decades of waiting. And while he'd never done anything criminal, he was known by many as a compulsive liar and an exaggerator. He'd also stolen several priceless artifacts from Stanford that included a walking stick belonging to the founder, Leland Stanford, 300 rare books, and an unidentified skull he'd taken from the anthropology department. The rare books alone were valued in the thousands of dollars, which made the theft a felony in the state of California. So he pled guilty and was dismissed from the job in 1976. It's just a few years after Arlis's murder, along with getting a 6-month suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. Then in 1992, he was reported for forging a diploma he'd stolen from Stanford. After the forgery, he'd stayed under the radar, living a quiet life as an insurance adjuster. In June of 2018, after unequivocally matching Crawford's DNA to the case, 2 detectives knocked on the door of his ground floor studio apartment in San Jose. The 72-year-old yelled through the door that he needed to get dressed. But after several minutes of him not opening the door, they knew he was stalling, so they let themselves in with a master key they got from the landlord. Crawford was sitting on his bed holding a revolver. The detectives retreated as Crawford put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger.
Wow. Whoa.
Yes.
This is, before you go any further, I just want to point out, I know we both talk about this in our classes, this is why there's no statute of limitations for murder. Cases like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why every case could possibly be solved. But in this case, again, that detective who thought, let me get the DNA because someday it might mean something, kind of gave me chills on that one. All right. A later search of his apartment uncovered a suicide note he'd written in 2016, the same year that the police had announced they had gotten a DNA profile in Arlis's case. But the letter made no mention of Arlis at all. And while there's no official motive for the killing, police knew from previous interviews that Crawford had been a full-fledged police officer with Santa Clara. But he was forced to take a security job with Stanford when the police downsized and they eliminated his job in 1972. He was incredibly angry about being let go. So while he didn't have perhaps the usual markers for a rapist or a sexually motivated killer, detectives then hypothesized that he was so angry about this position and about kind of his lot in life that he snapped, and Arlis happened to be the only woman in the building when he did. I don't know that I necessarily agree with their theory completely on that regard, and we don't know what else is in the files, but I do think that they're onto something with his anger and strain and perhaps resenting someone who was there in faith, perhaps resenting people who were there. Something about the church and their faith might have also had something to do with that, or might have triggered him further. Obviously, it's about opportunity, too. He was the night watchman. Someone was alone. We know that. But it's hard to then speculate beyond that about his motive. For Arlis's family, the lack of motive or trial didn't matter. Simply knowing her killer had a name and that he'd been found was enough to bring closure for her siblings and her mother. Unfortunately, her father had passed away only 3 months prior to Stephen Crawford being identified, and he died never knowing who had killed his daughter. But her family was extremely grateful for the Santa Clara detectives for keeping Arlis's case open and active for over 40 years. Arlis's husband, Bruce, grieved her murder deeply. He took a leave of absence from school and spent several months drifting between friends' couches before they got together and staged an intervention to help him return to medical school. I thought about that too. The guilt factor, even though he did nothing wrong, I can't imagine having parted with her, having a fight. She's the reason he was there. All those factors probably weighed on him so tremendously, the poor man. And he did try to go back to Stanford after about 18 months, but after just one semester there, he just couldn't handle the memories and the trauma. So he transferred to Amherst College instead. By 1984, he'd received his medical degree and joined a psychiatric residency where he studied the brain chemistry of war veterans suffering from PTSD. He went on to specialize in PTSD and trauma, and in 1992, he gave an interview about how Arlis's murder had affected him. Even though he was remarried and had several children at the time, he still described losing Arlis as one of the worst experiences of his life. They'd only been married for 3 months when she'd been killed, and it took him a long time to process and move on. Bruce has gone on to use his own experiences with trauma to inform his research. He's currently a senior fellow of the Child Trauma Academy in Houston, Texas, and he teaches psychiatry and behavioral sciences courses with Chicago's Feinberg School of Medicine. He has also consulted with the FBI on several of their high-profile cases with child victims. So he went on to do some really profound things. As for Arlis, she was laid to rest in the Sunset Memorial Garden Cemetery in her hometown of Bismarck. There are no memorials or scholarships in her name that I could find, so I hope that by covering her case today, we're keeping her story alive by bringing more attention to her story. Okay, we've really been enjoying all of these case suggestions, listeners. Thank you. We've received so many, so thank you for being such wonderful, active listeners. And as a reminder, if you have a case for us, you can send your suggestion to abjackentertainment.com/campuskillings.
Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes.
For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Meghan Sachs and Dr. Amy Shlosberg, with research and writing by Abagail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/CampusKillings. You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.